the worrying part about this. It's great to see good store prices after such a rough spring and summer, but people need to be careful from the point of view that there's the store price is now the lion's share of that, any of those production finishing systems, so that increases the risk. When the store price accounts for so much of the overall cost, there's very little that can be done from an efficiency gains point of view to try and sort of claw things back. So that's something that people just need to be aware of and need to do their sums.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and with the launch of the Beef Budgets for 2024 at the National Ploughing Championships last week, I'm joined by Teagasc Beef Specialist Aidan Murray to get an update. Aidan, you're very welcome. In comparison to 2023, what does the figures to date show for the national kill?
Well, I suppose, look, at the start of the year, Catherine, we had predicted that there would be a sort of a fall off of about 30 to 40,000 cattle less than in 2023, and we were probably looking at slaughtering somewhere around about 1.74 million this year or thereabouts. But that hasn't really manifested itself up to this point yet, in that we've killed about 9,000 cattle more than we did compared to 2023 year to date, and even in the last week or so, the kill was up at 37,500 head, which was 5,000 ahead of the same time last year. So that 30 or 40,000 hasn't manifested itself yet, which would suggest that things could tighten up as we go through, that we mightn't just see as high a kills into October and early November, maybe as we traditionally would if that prediction of 30 or 40,000 cattle less for 24 is to come true.
And how have the prices changed in comparison to this time last year?
Well, if I look at the different animal categories running across from sort of the 5 to 600 kilo steer right down to 280 kilo weanling heifer, what has actually happened is that compared to last year, all those prices per kilo live weight on average across all those sectors are up another 3%. So, typically that 5 to 600 kilo steer is probably running across all three categories about 10 to 15 cent a kilo more than last year. The top third of steers in that 5 to 600 kilogram mark were trading at on average 298 last year. They're 308 this year. And even the poorer quality, the bottom third in that category, was averaging about 219 last year. They're up to 234 this year. And that goes right across the board, but probably the biggest lift that we see is in that 4 to 450 kilo bull weanling. They, on average last year, at the top end, were sort of trading at in around 340. 341, and this year that same top third are around about 370. So the exporters and activity from home buyers is really driving that sort of strong bull weanling trade, whereas we don't really see that in that lighter heifer weanling. The same demand is not there, and across all the categories, that's the only one that is back on. That's the only one that has come back compared to last year. It's trading those top third of 280 kilo heifers are at averaging about 312 this year, whereas they were 317 last year.
Overall prices are good and there is demand around the ring for the heavier type stock in. Based on the figures that you've analysed to date, what does the supply of Irish beef look like for the rest of the year?
Well, as I say, the thing looks as if, if that 30 or 40,000 head is less is to come through, you would imagine that would feed into for the next sort of 14 or 15 weeks or that remain for this year. So that could leave, supplies tight. If you were to average that out, it probably means that, 34, 35,000 head a week would be a sort of an average figure if that was to come through. So you'd imagine it's tight. The exports have been good, even though calf exports were down by about 7,000 compared to this time last year. You see more store cattle and heavier cattle actually going for export, more weanlings going for export. So we're probably going to breach that 300,000 head weanlings live exported again this year, or 300,000 head of cattle exported live this year. So that's going to put pressure on even next year, with births being down in the suckler herd by about 40,000 head and the dairy herd stabilised. We're potentially looking at maybe even 50,000 head less cattle going through the system next week, with an overall slaughter figure of about 1.68 million. So a continual drop off, which leaves supplies tight. If the market demand is there, that means that you would imagine that the beef price should remain hopefully fairly competitive, and there's nothing to signal that there's any significant drop to come.
Farmers that are doing up budgets at the moment, in relation to a continental steer around 530 kilos, farmers are currently paying around €1,632. Can you talk through some of the expected costs and what a farmer would need to be getting?
Yeah, well, we look at three systems there. We look at the continental cross that's coming in at 530 kilos, and then you've got the Frisian type, which would be a lesser type, and a Hereford cross, which is sort of in between. They're coming in at 500 kilos. So what we do is we look at sort of good quality silage plus 4 to 5 kilos of concentrate fed over the winter, looking for about a kilo gain a day. And on that, say for example, that continental 530 kilo, we're looking to bring it from about 530 kilos live weight up to about 670, and that would leave us with about a 375 kilo carcass. As you alluded to there, that animal is up 10 cent a kilo, so it's €53 a head dearer to buy this year than it was last year, leaving the purchase price at 632. And then what we're seeing is we've actually dropped the meal price across all the sectors on all the budgets, because last year we had it in at about 350 a tonne, and this year we have it down at 310, even though there's probably parts of the country that you're able to buy a ration at sort of 280, 290. So it's way more competitive this year, so that'll drop the feed costs. And the total feed costs this year are, for that continental silage plus concentrates and about half interest, would work out at about €571, meaning that the sort of overall cost of bringing that store, including the store price, to finish would be about 2,200 odd euro. And if you divide that across a 375 kilo carcass, it means that next spring you would be looking at a break-even price of 587, which is up from 580 for the same budget that was done last year. And equally, it's the same. There is savings on the feed side, but that's all been swallowed up by the extra cost of the store. Even the planers, Frisian type stores, they've gone up by about 15 cent a kilo, and the Herefords are up about 14 cent a kilo. So you're talking at, for the Frisian type next spring, you're looking for a break-even price of about 532. And for that Hereford cross, about 579. Even though they're cheaper coming in, you're dealing with a lighter carcass, typically a 326 kilo carcass for the Frisian and a 332 kilo carcass. So look, the worrying part about this, it's great to see good store prices after such a rough spring and summer. But, people need to be careful from the point of view that there's the store price is now the lion's share of that, any of those production finishing systems. So that increases the risk, and if there's any, when the store price accounts for so much of the overall cost, there's very little that can be done from an efficiency gains point of view to try and sort of claw things back. So that's something that people just need to be aware of and need to do their sums.
For farmers that are buying heifers at the moment and planning to finish them before housing next winter, what prices are being paid and what are the expected costs, or what break-even price will be needed next year?
Well, we do a weanling to beef system for both steers and heifers. And if we look at that, typically we're buying in that lighter heifer, 280 kilos. We're looking to bring them to about 550 kilos at 20 months and a 296 kilo carcass. So, and there's a modest amount of meal fed over the first winter. Typically just around a kilo or so, and then you've got 60 days where meal is fed at grass at sort of about 3 kilos going off grass. So those animals are actually cheaper to buy this year. They're down about 5 cents a kilo. So that 280 kilo heifer is typically around 8.74 this year. The feed costs then and the fixed costs on that system are about 616, leaving the sort of overall break-even price for that heifer. You need to claw back €1,490, which works out at about 503 a kilo next sort of October, November, December time, and that's down from about 513 a kilo last year. So they seem to be, if people want to spread their risk a bit, they seem to be better value. There's not the same demand for them. You can buy good quality. They're back slightly in price. A lot of, doing them well over the first winter time on good silage and sort of 1 kilo of concentrate or thereabouts. Turn out early, gain as much weight of grass, and then just put a bit of finish on them before they're sold next autumn. That seems an attractive system, and that because the animal is actually that wee bit cheaper coming in.
That's great, Aidan. I suppose finally, for farmers that are considering purchasing stock and finishing cattle over the winter, what 3 tips have you for them?
Well, it's really all about cost, Catherine. Know your feed cost, know what you can afford to pay for that animal actually coming in, and try and sort of hit the targets in terms of average daily gain, carcass gain. And one of the things I suppose this year is that if your silage quality on a system like that we described there is just 68 or below, you really need to think about maybe switching to maybe a much higher, maybe ad lib concentrate diet. And because ration prices are way more competitive this year, it'll give you maybe a more predictable performance in terms of carcass gain, in terms of live weight gain. It takes the variability out of it. And there's not an awful lot of difference in price this year because rations have become way more competitive, and that's maybe worth considering if people are tight on silage or they're a wee bit iffy in terms of the quality of the silage they have for finishing. It might be fine for dry suckler cows, but for finishing you need sort of 68 DMD plus, and basically the higher the better if you want to minimise concentrate. But if you're in the boat that your silage quality is not at that level, you really need to consider the ad lib concentrate route.
That's great, Aidan. Thanks very much. The full details of the budgets we mentioned will be included in the podcast notes. And for any farmer that's interested in completing a budget or looking to discuss any of the points that you mentioned, they can discuss it with their local Teagasc advisor.
Thanks very much, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Aidan for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.